Welcome back to Mindset Monday for summer 2026. Dr. Rohit Chandra and I are so excited to continue our podcast series where we explore how mindset shapes the way we live, grow, struggle, heal, and connect with one another. Today, we are exploring a topic that feels both ancient and deeply relevant to our everyday lives: wisdom. What does it mean to be wise? Can wisdom be taught? Do we gain it through our own experience or suffering, mistakes, stories, or by listening to the lives of others? To help us answer these questions, we are honored to be joined by a very special guest, Deepak Ramola. I had the true privilege of meeting Deepak about through a wonderful family friend, and I was immediately inspired by the way that he spoke about life lessons, storytelling, and the wisdom that exists in every person's lived experience. I remember leaving our conversations feeling like his work was exactly the kind of thing that we want to highlight on our Mindset Monday podcast. And so, just to give a little background about Deepak, he is a wisdom historian and award winning educator. He currently serves as a lecturer and life design fellow at Stanford University and co teaches the Meaning of Life course at MIT. A graduate of Harvard Graduate School, he previously served as the Kindness Ambassador for the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO. Over the last 15 years, Deepak has worked at the intersection of wisdom and lifelong learning through his organization, Project Fuel, collecting life lessons from 195 countries. His methodology has been recognized as the world's top 100 innovations in education and has been adopted across 5 continents. Deepak is also an accomplished author with 3 best-selling books spanning poetry, self-help, and narrative nonfiction. Deepak is a celebrated Hindi lyricist with renowned artists like Amitabh Bachchan, Farhan Akhtar, and Rekha Bhardwaj lending their voices to his songs. Passionate about sharing life lessons and lived experiences from diverse cultures, Deepak acts as a conduit for understanding and empathy. From conveying the wisdom of the Maasai tribe to young girls in Afghanistan, to sharing insights from earthquake survivors in Nepal and Syrian refugees in Europe, Deepak is a modern day storyteller and artist. Together with his team, he has created the world's first set of villages of life lessons, fostering connection and cross pollination of learning across borders. What I love most about Deepak's work is that it reminds us that this so called wisdom is not only found in the textbooks, titles, or formal expertise. It can really be found in ordinary people and on the lessons that we carry from our own lives. So, Deepak, welcome to Mindset Monday. We are so excited to have you.
Thank you so much, Sachi. Thank you so much, Rohit. Wonderful to be here.
Wonderful. So, to start off, since our episode is really focused on wisdom today, we would like to ask and love to understand, how do you define wisdom? What exactly is wisdom, and how is it different from knowledge?
Mm. The scientific definition of wisdom that there is a remote consensus on is that wisdom is the culturally situated capacity to navigate life's uncertainty using reflective judgment, using resilient understanding or adaptive understanding of self for common good. And my own definition of wisdom in simpler terms is wisdom is like being in a garden, knowing when to sow, knowing when to weed, knowing when to just enjoy the garden. And it is this application of information and knowledge in a context sensitive way, in an emotionally regulated way that allows for us to have an embodied experience that allows us to navigate life. So, uh, the major difference between knowledge and wisdom is that knowledge is one of the resources of wisdom, but it cannot be wisdom because knowledge applied is wisdom. It's in the use of knowledge that one becomes wise. It's not in the admiration of it. A small example would be, you may know 6 languages, but if a person falls right in front of you and you don't know what to say to them, to console them, to make them feel better, to comfort them, those six languages and the knowledge of them, the vocabulary, the abundant understanding of syntax, and um, just the whole lexicon of a language fails you in a moment where you most need it if you don't know what to say. But if you know, even if you know one language or a dialect, even spoken in some indigenous community, and someone falls down in front of you, and you reach out with words that you know best, strung together, to be able to help that person feel a little bit more restored, a little bit more taken care of, then you have applied the knowledge you have to its best use in the context that faces you. We have seen wisdom across history mostly in the lens or through the lens of philosophy and religion. We've seen, godly men and saints be wise, or we've seen philosophers like Seneca and Socrates and Aristotle talk about wisdom. And so wisdom has been far beyond the common man. It is something that we across human history have put on a pedestal. And the last 2 decades, I would say, of science have tried making that wisdom pedestrian, and it has shown us that we all have um, capacity for wise judgment and wise decision making. So that knowledge that we amass and accumulate throughout life has to come to serve someone, and hopefully not just us, but a larger community. And that is where in that academic definition of wisdom, it culminates to having, that capacity for common good. And that is, I think, a key differentiator between knowledge, intelligence, and wisdom.
Beautifully said. And thinking about philosophy, when I was preparing for this, I looked at Socrates, and Socrates had these conflicting statements. And there often are conflicting statements, like birds of a feather flock together, and yet
Mm,
opposites attract. So Socrates, wrote or said at some point, wisdom begins in wondering, or wisdom begins in wonder. That acknowledging one's ignorance is perhaps a starting point for being wise or becoming wise. But then he also indicated that the only true wisdom is in knowing that you know nothing. So that
mm.
left me very confused. But I wanted to ask about to what degree do you think humility is important in becoming wise, or just in terms of wisdom in general?
Yeah, I love that question because when I hear those two statements, I see them braided together as the precursor or a preface of each other. You see, for wondering, one has to admit that there is more beyond that what one knows. And that origin point allows one to either consciously or subconsciously accept that I don't have all the know-how. I don't know everything. So I must go seeking. Wondering is in many ways allowing your imagination to flow for things that don't exist yet in your realm of knowing, or things that do exist, but you don't know all the nuances of it. Intellectual humility, as Socrates points out, knowing what you don't know or that you will never know enough, is one of the most imperative tenets of wisdom or wise people. Somebody who says to you, I know everything, I have arrived, is a scary person because the world is a big, beautiful, and complex place. Our brain is a 40-watt processor. And the way it makes up for that deficiency is by categorizing information into different labels, into different buckets. In psychology, we call this schemas. And then all these schemas are what, we operate from constantly. To be able to innovate and wonder new things, you have to extend yourself beyond a schema that gets you stuck. And to be able to do that, you have to, on a very fundamental level, ask yourself, what is it I'm curious about? And that question in itself, I think, is a little bowing down to the greatness of the universe and the abundance of the world, because that allows you to then frame an inquiry that allows you to situate a question, that allows you to investigate the insights around that question, raw material, resources, books, podcasts, videos, and you go on this journey only to discover how little you know as you progress. Intellectual humility is one of the six core skills that construct wisdom as a skill. For the longest time, in as I was saying, in human history, we saw wisdom as an abstract virtue that came as a consequence of age. And it's only in the last few years, neurobiology, social psychology has proven, or even cognitive science has proven to us that wisdom is not a factor of age. Wisdom is a factor of experience. So even a 4-year-old has the perfect wisdom of a 4-year-old. And because of that liberation from the captivity of age, we can now attribute and understand wisdom as something that does not happen across the grad school mountain with gray hair and wrinkled faces. It happens right where you are with the life you're living. And that proximity to experience, that proximity to the aliveness of your own circumstance, allows you to pay attention. When you pay attention, you realize what are the missing gaps. And there are many missing gaps. I mean, any person in the world who has tried to dive into any concept or theme of their choice. In my case, it's wisdom. I've been studying wisdom for the last, 17 plus years. And the more I study, the more my mind is blown by how much there is. I was just reading a new book on practical wisdom by Barry Schwartz. And I was thinking to myself, wow, I've read so much on wisdom, and yet I'm having an aha moment on how this is framed. A chef would say the same thing. You can walk up to a chef and say, do you know everything? A Michelin star chef. And say, do you know everything about food? And they're going to give you that raised eyebrow look. It's like, no, I'm just getting started. So, humility is creating the space for what you don't know. And hopefully, there is always something you don't know about something you're passionate about. And that is what keeps you in the pursuit of being better.
That's incredible. That's such a rich answer. And it kind of makes me think, I love what you said. Even a 4-year-old has the perfect wisdom for a 4-year-old. Like thinking about Rohit and I talk about this all the time. I volunteer with younger children, and I often feel that they teach me when I'm having a bad day, their joy and how much they love to just be running around and have no worries. Something about that, just there's a wisdom there that from their lived experience that I collect, and I come home feeling so much lighter and so much better. And I guess this really ties to my next question. So, in your work with this Project Fuel, where Fuel stands for Forward the Understanding of Every Life Lesson, you collect these life lessons from people across different cultures, countries, and lived experiences. So, what really inspired you and first made you believe in this, that ordinary people's life lessons could become this source of education and inspiration for others?
Mm. My mother, Sachi, was a big influence. I grew up in India on the foothills of the Himalayas in a place called Uttarakhand. And my mother, who grew up as a farmer, was the first one to be pulled out of school when she was growing up. Her grandmother didn't want her to study with boys or study at all. And so when I was growing up, just watching my mother, I was always in a dilemma for how much she knew, despite the fact that she didn't complete education, to the point where I actually didn't believe her. I thought she's lying about it. And my mother would always say, the fact is I didn't go to school, but the truth is life is my classroom. And when you understand how layered that statement is, how revelatory that knowing is, that my life is my classroom, which means every single person is a textbook, is a book, is a walking book, is a breathing repository of understanding and perspectives. And so that from a very young age, I would say around the age of 14, shifted how I viewed the world. And I was very convinced that if my mother knew so much, that means everybody who's living also must know so much, or around as much, or maybe more. And so I started collecting life lessons of people who came home for dinner, school bus driver, tuition class teachers, friends. And I was always enriched by the lives that somebody else had lived exactly in the same town, exactly in the same hours as me, and had arrived at a completely different understanding of life and its complexities. And by the time I was 17, I had amassed hundreds of life lessons that had made me, uh, perspective rich enough to feel joyous and curious and just in awe of humanity. And despite its flaws, despite what the news headlines tell us, I always have found a very cathartic solace in the presence of another person telling their story. In that interaction, in that correspondence, you get to see a very zoomed in version of life through the lens of one person, one challenge, one story at a time. And I think we need that. We sometimes get bucketed or bucket humanity into statistics. 28 people died last night. Okay, but if you start putting names and faces to those 28 people, if you start asking what was their favorite color, what dish did they eat over holidays, what was their favorite festival, what did they do for the summer break, you can spend literally years just encoding and decoding the lives of people. And I think this statistical quantification of human beings, whether it's in the media, whether it's through the algorithm on social media, uh, deprives us of the juicy aliveness that they contain and the many multitudes that a human being is. And so when I started exploring that through the question of what's your life lesson, I would see a range of responses. I would meet people who had never thought about that question before in their life and had never paused to even assimilate or reflect about what it is that they would say is the moral of their story thus far. I met people who had hundreds of life lessons and they had trouble choosing one. And then I also have met people, the moment you ask them the question, as if that they were waiting all their life for this one answer to be passed on. And they have crafted it so neatly that you would think this is a quote or an excerpt you're pulling out of a book they wrote. And so across demographics, across populations, across cultural contexts, I have seen everybody has wisdom. Even the person you despise the most knows something about something that you have no idea about. And keeping yourself open to that allows us to be uh, less indifferent. I think hate is less dangerous than indifference because indifference asks us to bundle up and turn the other way. Hate at least allows us to confront what we are feeling and look in the face of the other person and deal with the conflicts and the muddiness of what it is. But indifference is denial. And what I saw in conversations with people was that we all are living these very, very layered, very, very colorful lives. If only we pause to ask each other, what is the sense we are making of that spectrum, we might learn something for ourselves. And through Project Fuel, our goal has been to really take that work into school classrooms across communities in the world and teach young people to not wait to be 60 and then respect their wisdom, but to be four and say with a certain sense of surety, this is what I know for sure today. It may change in 10 years or 10 days, but this is what I know today. And I hope it is useful not only to me, but somebody else who's living a similar life and asking a familiar question.
Wonderful points. You mentioned 28 people died yesterday, and I was thinking of the incident where a woman went swimming in Florida recently in a river that was known to be infested with alligators, and she was warned. But she and her boyfriend and I think another friend went in, and she tragically had both arms bitten off and died. And, the wisdom that people were giving her was sort of, I wouldn't go in there. It's not a wise decision. They're alligators, and she went. I think of myself, now I obviously am alive, but I think of myself at age 17. And when I had yearbook quotes that I was supposed to put in, one of them was from Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha. And wisdom is not communicable. The wisdom which a wise man tries to communicate always sounds foolish. Knowledge can be communicated, but not wisdom. And so that was the quote that I had in my yearbook. And I was knowledgeable for my age, but I was not wise. I was pedantic. I think of my father and how he said to me at various instances, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. When he would try to tell me to make a certain choice, and I would say, nope, I'm not making that choice. So, parents often try to give us advice, and sometimes the advice is the right advice, and we find out from experience that, well, they were right. Other times that advice does not work for us, and our instincts say, no, I shouldn't do it the way that, my parents did. Their lives are different. I have my own instinct. I know the circumstances I'm facing, and, this is a choice that I'm fairly sure is the right one for me. They would make a different one based on their life experiences, and, their understanding of the world. So, to what degree can we communicate wisdom to others in a way which helps them live their lives better? Or do we have to just struggle like a butterfly coming out of the chrysalis? If someone helps a butterfly out of the chrysalis, it weakens the butterfly because at least they're not strong enough to fly. The blood has not kind of gone into their wings. So, to what degree can we really teach others or advise others? And to what degree do people have to just live their lives?
Mm. Okay, let me get straight straight into the heart of that question. We we leave a lot to chance when it comes to wisdom. We want people to suffer and distinguish their own life choices and then emerge victorious at the end. There is no other skill that we want somebody to be in the fire for and show us that they survive. I often say that we expect people to become wise or have wise decision making or wise reasoning, um, the way we expect someone to build muscles or muscle up during a street fight. Imagine all gyms in the world were banned. You couldn't lift a single thing. The only way you could bulk up and you could gain strength and become more strong and resilient is when you got into street fights. That would look very different. And I see both of you laugh because it's like a crazy idea. It's like, no, no, no. You practice so that when you are in a street fight, you can defend yourself. When you are in a dangerous place, you have the ammunition and the resilience to see it. But we don't do that with wisdom. We say, go live your life. And then you're going to go through this tragic heartbreak. You are going to be fired by your job, even though you were the best employee. You will lose all your money, or your children will not like you, and then deal with it. I think there is a certain sense of, for a lack of a better word, laziness or despondency in how we want people to practice wisdom. It is in the dangerous ring of life and its complexities. However, you cannot shield someone and the life trajectory they're going to have, but you can cushion them by showing them what their capacity to empathize is, what their biases are, what their hatefulness is about, how limited their practical skills are, how non-reflective somebody is, so that when life offers you a juicy experience, when life offers you a moment of such heroic, tender growth, and you've moved on, seeking another peak, another hill to climb on, rather than to meditate on it and understand what it has taught you. That frivolousness towards our own life and its circumstances, its experiences, is what puts us in the danger again and again. It's like repeating the same class without learning the same lessons. And so, What you can teach really for wisdom are the skills which make wise reasoning and wise decision making. You can't make people wise, but you can help them develop the skills that a wise person needs to make a wise judgment or a wise decision. One has to ask oneself, what does wisdom solve for? It can't be to eat a sandwich, right? It's like, okay, why do you want to be wise? I ask people all the time when they say to me, help me be wise or tell me what my wisdom is. I'm like, why do you want to be wise? You want to be wise so that you can take culturally sensitive, context relevant decisions. That's when you need wisdom, right? You go around asking people what your advice is. Should I go to college? Should I take a year off? Should I do a sabbatical? I'm burnt out. What should I do? Is this person good for me? Should I get married to them? You're asking all of those opinions because you're trying to make a decision. And so you need wisdom to make these micro and macro decisions from a momentary basis to a meta level and an existential basis. Wisdom in itself is comprised of six skills, and across different disciplines, we have now shown that wisdom is intellectual humility, there is value tolerance, there is emotional homeostasis or emotional regulation, an emotionally neutral person, not the highest of highs and not the lowest of lows. Um, a sense of self, an understanding of self, which is reflection or reflective person, practical knowledge of life. You should know how to file your taxes and talk to people, not be socially awkward and communicate, what you know. And then there is the whole aspect of dealing with uncertainty. One of the biggest skills or attributes of wise people is that they know how to, or they at least have the openness to deal with uncertainty and unknowingness of their lives. And the last is thinking about common good. So when you break it down into these six skills, I think you can teach people intellectual humility. Socrates did that all the time by asking questions after questions after questions. And, his method was really to show people, you start with a strong base of what you think you know, but in 7 to 8 questions, that solid ice becomes thin ice. And you start to, tremble a little because you feel like you don't know enough. You can teach practical knowledge of life. All our schools and colleges and now YouTubes of the world and reels are teaching practical knowledge all the time. How to swim. I just learned how to drive. And I was watching all these driving videos and I used those skills to incorporate, right? So that reflection, you have so many journals available to you. You have so many prompt and doctrinal ways in which you can understand, therapeutic ways in which you can understand how to reflect. Religion or faith or spirituality guides a lot of people to understanding how they should do common good. There are incentive programs in corporates. Do it. Enough people do it. That's a whole different moral, ethical, incentive question in the world. But I think when you see wisdom as not this abstract, big concept, but as this collage of skills, you can ask yourself, do I have them? Do I practice them? And if I do, how do I make sure that I pass them on or sustain them over the course of my life? So I think from that lens, wisdom is teachable, or wise skills are teachable. And then the person has the choice to act wise or not wise, and that is on them. That part is not my responsibility.
I absolutely love that. Just building those skills and actively practicing them. That's so much of what we talk about in our podcast. And one part of your work that actually really amazed me was this world wisdom map. So you collected hundreds of life lessons from 195 countries, read through 97,000 words, and described feeling a million emotions, but you still related to all these different people. So, I'm sure it's hard to distinguish maybe like one or two lessons, life lessons from somebody that really stuck with you or surprised you. But could you share a little bit about what you documented from this experience and maybe a life lesson that stuck with you?
Yeah, the World Wisdom Map is a pretty rich knowledge bank, wisdom bank in so many ways. When we collected all the life lessons, we went to a data scientist and we asked them to pull out patterns. So I'm going to share with you some of the lessons I learned from the meta-analysis of these life lessons. And one of them was that hope is an ingredient, an active ingredient in everyone's life. You either start from a place of hope and then you become dejected and disappointed and you're like, ugh, everything, is bereft of joy. Or you start from a place of disappointment or sadness, and then you find hope that allows you to push through towards the end. And when you reach the end, you're like, ugh, this doesn't matter again. It's all, a hue and cry about nothing. Or you have lived a life like the movie Pursuit of Happiness, of such challenges that there comes a point where hope becomes the milestone you arrive at despite what life has offered you. So I saw through every life lesson the thread of hope showing up either at the starting, the middle, or the end. And so I felt in that knowing that hope is a very, very important construct on how we live. Even though we may see ourselves as hopeless, it dips in and out and it keeps us in motion in some sense. The second important lesson that I love from the repository is of a 4-year-old Bulgarian girl. And the life lesson is never eat an ice cream from both ends. You will make a lot of mess and you will not enjoy it. And I love that lesson because it reminds me that we are eating the ice creams of our careers, our relationships, our fellowships, our friendships from both ends. We are maximizing them constantly instead of savoring them one bite at a time. And I think it is that differentiation for me through that life lesson that struck a chord. And the third, I would say, was was a was a life story of a girl who discovered these old family photo albums and saw that everybody in her ancestry of those old photos from 1940s and 50s looked very sad in the photos. In more digging up, she discovered that actually many of them were um, sadly killed during the Holocaust. And it unleashed an entire new understanding of her family history, of her knowing. And it was triggered by the question of what is my life lesson? And as she was going through her own story, discovering her background, her legacy, and the pain that her generation and the generation before had endured, was a reminder of how powerful it is to pause sometimes to ask yourself, who am I coming trailing? Where are my roots? How did those roots become this resilient? And what lessons have I carried, even by just being born into this family, into this culture, into this country, into this particular, life situation?
So I'm a child psychiatrist, and I love your point about, being able to garner wisdom from people of different ages, including children. Um, Often children will say things, and ask their parents questions that will make the parents say, "You're right. I really don't know why I'm doing that," or "Yeah, I really shouldn't be behaving this way," or I never thought about that. So, their focused curiosity, their desire to master the world, enables us to sometimes reflect on ourselves. And also, I have a 4.5-year-old nephew, and a couple of years ago, he was asking when it became dark, he said, "I want to see the moon." Okay, sure. Took him outside. And he goes, "Moon," and just the unadulterated joy. I was like, we should really have that. So in
Yes.
some ways, it feels like it's important to learn from children. But then also, the wisest person I ever met was someone who looked like a sage. He was my Mossie's father-in-law, my mother's sister's husband's father, Prakash Narayan. And, he wore white robes. He was in his 90s when I remember this. And he would sit me down, kind of clap me on the shoulder, and then tell me something that was inevitably wise and I needed to hear. And he spent the last years of his life writing books on philosophy, Hindu philosophy and religion. But he gave me two life lessons that I carried in my wallet for a while, including one that was, it is better to know where to get the information than to keep it in our head. Essentially, don't fill your head with nonsense, useless or nonsensical information. Know what's needed. But it's striking that we can we can learn from those who are young, we can learn from those who are older, we can learn from people of all backgrounds. I work with a poorer population, and they teach me. And the last point I'll make is I began to love the music of Olivia Rodrigo, who's 23 years old. And her recent album really spans the gamut of emotions of a recent relationship she was in. And the song The Cure, in it, she reflects that basically her negative thinking may well have cost her her relationship or contributed to the breakdown of her relationship. And it's a hard won lesson. But
Mm.
I'm just struck by her wisdom. She's been through a lot. She was a child actress, and then became a pop singer. And there was a sort of a conflict behind the scenes with Taylor Swift and all this. But there are people of all ages, essentially, from whom you can learn. And I just love that you have pointed that out.
No, I love that, and I think what you're underlining there is that we need a certain openness to learn from everybody. Ageism obstructs us from seeing perspectives to really get out of that schema, schema that gets us stuck to another schema. And I feel the more and more I talk to people around the world, some of my favorite life lessons come from children all the time. If I had to pick 100 best lessons in the world, I think 70 of them would be children's life lessons. Not because of not because of just what they're saying in their literalness, but what they're saying in their metaphoricness. And I think in that metaphorical ability, they expand the horizon of something so simple that you can immediately, tangibly embody it and ask yourself the larger questions. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. I'm sure your patience and your community allows you to soak in that wisdom on a regular basis.
That is so wonderful. Yeah, I really love what you said about, when the child is talking about the ice cream cone, they're maybe not thinking of it in that metaphoric way, but as we grow up and we learn about the world and we kind of try to have understanding of what different metaphors might be for life, we can pull that out. And so it's so lovely to engage with younger children that say these imaginative things and what they love about the world, the moon and enjoying nature and all those pieces. And it's reminding me when I was little, I remember, my dad would always tell me when I was really nervous or anxious to do something, learning how to drive or starting high school or something like that. He would always say, remember, a million people have done this before you. And I found it so comforting because maybe we don't have to discover everything on our own or reinvent the wheel. Like your work is showing me that listening to the lessons of others will help us feel less alone in our own challenges to pick up those wisdom skills. How did somebody else think about it? We can't predict all the challenges that we're going to face, but at the same time, we can gain and garner those wise skills that will help us make those decisions when we get to those challenges or to those moments. And it's kind of this beautiful cycle because as you grow up, then you can offer what you learn from a 4-year-old. Maybe you offer it to a much older person who may
Yeah,
need to hear about the ice cream cone, right? So it's
absolutely.
lovely. And Deepak, I have to ask, you've collected all these lessons, all these stories. What have you learned in life? What is one of your, I'm sure, many life lessons?
As you can imagine, I reflect a lot, so I have one one every week. But the one that has been really consistent over the last few years is that your talent is not your gift, it's your responsibility. And it has really served me because I do a bunch of things. I write books, I write songs, I teach, I paint villages, just speak to so many people and do so many things. Um, but I feel like when somebody takes their talent as their gift, you tend to be a little moody about it. It's like, oh, today I'm not in the mood to sit down and write. You may actually be a little careless. You may choreograph your life where it doesn't intersect and doesn't hold you accountable. But when you take your talent as your responsibility, you do not fantasize and romanticize what needs to be done. When I sit down to write, I am not this writer thinking, oh my God, I need mountains and a beautiful visual. Most of the books and the songs I've written are on airplanes because I don't romanticize that I need to be in some gorgeous location. I'm like, no, you have the talent to write. You better get to writing. Create whatever mood it is you need to create with the songs um, on your AirPods. But that, I think that accountability to self has taken me all over the world because I knew I could talk to people from a young age. In talking to people, I trained myself to be a better listener, to cry less than my interviewee, and to listen wholeheartedly. And once I realized that, to you know, I don't know, be somebody or do a job that does not serve that, felt a little inauthentic to me and also distant from what I wanted to do. So yeah, taking your talent as a responsibility allows you to deliver, to show up, even though when you're tired and even when you have very limited means to actually bring your ideas to life. And the second thing that I have learned more recently is that there are two kinds of people in the world. The one who the one who are chasing or working towards what I call borrowed power, and the other that work with embodied power. And borrowed power comes from the job you have, the money in your bank account, if you're a power couple or not, is your name in the press, how pop famous you are, everything that's borrowed. It's a limelight, whether it's money. It's like, yeah, you've just constructed that reality for yourself, and I mean, beautifully, but it's borrowed. If that position was taken, if you were not the director or the president or whoever, then who are you? Loose of those strings, naked, who are you then as a person? And I think that is what leads us to embodied power. Most people think borrowed power is what they need to work for, and then comes end of life, and there is this deep dissatisfaction, this lack of inner contentment. I think the purpose of life is to figure out what your borrowed power is. Who are you? Minus all of that adage and decorative and performative and perceptive self of yours. And the work that we need to do is to get from that borrowed power to the embodied power. So I don't see borrowed power as an enemy of embodied power. I just see it as an enabler of embodied power. If your financial security is met, if you have the love of your life, if you are a lifelong learner, that should prepare you to better understand and unpack who you are, not avoid it. And if the test I have for most people is if I was standing at a grocery store, say Trader Joe's, and the queue was long, and I knew that it's going to take about 20 minutes to get to the counter, and I wanted to talk, and then I turn my head and I look at you, and the feeling I have is I don't think so I should talk to this person. It's okay. I'm going to scroll my phone. That means you exude a certain sense of inaccessibility about who you are. But if I have to find out that you are a top person working at one of these big OpenAI Anthropic companies, and that's the only reason I'll talk to you, then your borrowed power is speaking for you. And this happens all the time at conferences. You will see people reading your name tag and the company under it. And then there will be moments when you will want to just talk to the person. You don't even know they enter the room and you're like, I want to be friends with that person. I want to know who they are, not what they do. I want to know who they are. And I think as we prepare ourselves in life, we should prepare ourselves not just for what we do to answer that, but also who we are, both verbally and non-verbally to people that we interact with.
That's absolutely such a great takeaway. I think a lot of our podcast is bringing you on someone who's an expert, can bring an inspiring mindset or perspective, and then giving them actionable items. How can we also just as you said, how can we use that embodied power? And so, do you have some practices, some questions that audiences can start with to start collecting the wisdom of others, to start being open-minded, to garner these wisdom skills, as we call them?
Mm. I would say start with the very simple question. What is your life lesson? Ask that to your parents, ask that to your neighbors, ask that to the person you think you know inside out. You will be surprised that you may know nothing about what they think is their core moral philosophy of life. So, the simplest homework is turn to somebody around you and ask them the question, what has life taught you? And then listen and ask them, how did you learn it? Not just what they learned, but how did they learn it? And in that mirroring, you may not just discover more about them, but about yourself. So that's homework number one. And I think the other assignment that I have for myself and most people is to ask oneself what it is that you don't need validation for anymore. We as human beings are validation hungry creatures. And if you need the same validation for the same thing over and over again, you mistake a lot of time, you lose a lot of your agency in collecting evidence for what 200 people have already convinced you. Even at Stanford, in many, many office hours, or at MIT, I would often find students asking me in one way or the other, am I smart? And I used to think to myself, you worked so hard. You cleared all of those SATs and the AP classes and every additional internship even before you turned 16. And you have all of these projects and your statement of purposes and letter of recommendations from fancy people. And now you have made it and you're 4 years into Stanford doing some incredible work. And all you want to know is, am I smart? And I would say, no, that's not an interesting question. I think the world has proven to you enough that you are smart. I think the interesting question is, are you smart and humble? Are you smart and loving? Let's test that. Are you smart and socially confident? Are you smart and intellectually curious? That is a question I want to ask. So yeah, I think if we ask ourselves more intently and often enough, what do we not need validation for? We can retire our dependency on people and also our absolutely atrocious habit of boring people to death by asking validation for the same thing that we have always been validated for. So save some people in your life trouble. If you think you look good and you know the gym that you're doing is working or the books you're reading are making you curious, ask better questions. And I think that's a fundamental starting point for me.
And I'm struck by the fact that, a lot of people in life do spend time trying to protect their egos or, sort of shore up some aspect of their identity, um, and or convincing people. They spend a lot of time convincing people off that aspect of their identity. And it sounds like you're saying use your, what psychologists may call signature strengths, really actualize your potential, spend time doing that, really know what your embodied power is and use it. So thank you. That's really, really valuable.
Yeah, thank you.
That is absolutely wonderful. Deepak, thank you so much for joining us for our Mindset Monday podcast. I am amazed. I feel like I've just learned so much, and I know our audience is going to learn a lot from this episode. So, in the description of our video, we will have lots of resources for you to learn more about Deepak and his amazing work, and just some links to wisdom collecting activities that may help all of us develop some of these skills and change the way we think about building our wisdom. So thank you so much, everyone. This was wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you, Sachi. Thank you, Rohit.